The story began at school, where the teacher had concluded the day's lesson by asking the students whether they had any questions, assuring them that he would gladly review anything they didn't understand. He had made direct eye contact with Kurosa, who was seated right in front of him. As the school bell rang, Kurosa began packing his bag while the other students started leaving. He wondered whether their target had changed, having overheard some of the students talking about something he couldn't fully grasp. Just then, the teacher, Mr. Shiratori, called out to Kurosa, wishing him good luck as it was his turn to take care of the bunnies. Kurosa acknowledged it and left. On his way out, he noticed a girl approaching Mr. Shiratori to ask for a date, and a boy inquiring about his future. A crowd had gathered around Mr. Shiratori, and Kurosa felt that he truly was an impressive figure. Kurosa thought to himself that he would like to become a teacher like him one day. The scene shifted to the area where Kurosa was assigned to take care of the bunnies. There, he was screaming, as several students were bullying him mercilessly. A girl questioned whether they even understood what they were doing, implying that it had gone too far. One boy said he was turning Kurosa into a filthy pig, while another added that they were using real manure, calling it a growth supplement. A third boy sarcastically remarked that perhaps it would make Kurosa beautiful. They were forcefully feeding him rabbit droppings, telling him to chew it properly, claiming it was the only thing they could offer to a friend. They even held his mouth open and pulled his hair to force the food in. After this, they turned to their leader, Fudo, and asked what they should do next. Fudo remarked that Kurosa looked absolutely filthy and casually added that he was thinking of piercing Kurosa's ear. Kurosa immediately refused, saying that the hole his parents had given him, referring to his natural ears, was enough. But Fudo twisted his words, suggesting mockingly that Kurosa actually wanted it. Kurosa tried to clarify that it wasn't what he meant at all. A girl asked if anyone had an earring, and when no one did, Fudo said they could simply use a safety pin. Without any sterilization or care, he proceeded to stab the safety pin into Kurosa's ear. Kurosa let out a scream, overwhelmed by the intense pain. Fudo then said he would apply glue to the pin so that it wouldn't move easily. Just then, Miss Nene arrived, thanking Kurosa for all the help he had provided. But she quickly noticed the safety pin and the bleeding hole in his ear. Shocked, she asked what was going on. Fudo immediately covered up the situation by claiming it was nothing serious, that Kurosa had been bitten by a rabbit and had started crying, prompting them to check if he was bleeding. Miss Nene turned to Kurosa and asked if that was really the truth. They remembered Fudo's earlier threat, that if he told anyone, they would surely kill him. Out of fear, Kurosa lied and said what Fudo had claimed was true, adding that he was fine and it wasn't a big deal. Miss Nene, unaware of the truth, smiled and commented that they all seemed like such close friends. Fudo then asked her if it was all right for them to take over from there. She agreed, left the room, and shut the door behind her. After Miss Nene left, one of the boys commented that everything seemed all rosy in her hands. Another boy added that she looked around 25 and seemed like someone who might be into yaoi. A girl then wondered aloud whether Nene was actually into BL. Boys love. Fudo, noting that Miss Nene had noticed them, said they needed to adjust their strategy. One of the boys asked what he meant by that. Fudo suggested that they now enjoy the fruits of their labor, implying they should step back and avoid drawing any more attention, especially when it came to Kurosa. Meanwhile, Kurosa walked over to Class 2B, where he approached a girl named Hiji. He told her that it was love at first sight. Hiji was taken aback when he asked her out, and in response, she slapped him, telling him not to mess with her. Other girls nearby witnessed the scene and started whispering, wondering if Kurosa had lost a screw in his head. One black-haired girl speculated that maybe he had studied too much and gone mad, or perhaps he had made eye contact with Fudo, implying some darker influence. Still undeterred, Kurosa went to Nezima and asked her out on a date. She was visibly shocked. Then, Saeki appeared and confronted Kurosa, saying that he had definitely crossed the line. Saeki added that if Kurosa was going to get beaten up anyway, he might as well be the one to do it. Nezima, confused, asked what exactly he meant by that. Kurosa wondered if Saeki had been turning a blind eye to everything that had been happening. But Saeki told him to stop acting like a victim, and added that if someone pushed him around, he needed to fight back. That idea of fighting back echoed in Kurosa's mind as he made his way home. He sat in silence, holding an envelope in his hands, thinking that withdrawing from school might be his only option. He had genuinely wanted to graduate, but at that moment, running away felt like the only thing he could do. As he sat lost in thought, his mother unexpectedly returned home. Startled, Kurose jumped up, asking nervously why she wasn't at her night shift. She replied that she had forgotten something, then noticed the envelope and questioned what it was. She asked whether he was taking high school lightly. Kurose tried to explain that it wasn't what she thought, but she interrupted him, reminding him that after everything that had happened to his father, she had raised him on her own. Then, in a burst of emotion, she slapped him, scolding him for not thinking about his future. She reminded him how hard she had worked, sending him to a private school despite their struggles, and asked whether he was now implying that all her sacrifices were meaningless. Kurose, overwhelmed, apologized, and said he would make sure to get a certificate and apply to college. He insisted it wasn't what she thought, but his mother grew even more serious, accusing him of getting involved with someone and saying she hadn't raised him to become like that. In her rage, she kicked him and yanked his hair. Kurose kept insisting that it wasn't like that. His mother finally covered her face with her hands, asking him to stop and questioning aloud why she had to be so unfortunate. As she began to cry, Kurose could only sit there, silently wondering what he should do, how he could possibly escape this hell. The next morning, when Kurose arrived at school, he discovered that the bunny had already died. Surrounding the lifeless animal were the same boys who had bullied him before, standing there with cruel smiles on their faces. One of them suddenly slammed Kurose's face to the ground, mocking him and asking what it was all about, saying the bunny had died because Kurose had been rejected. Kurose accused them of lying and asked why they were going so far. At that moment, Fudo stepped forward and told him it was simply because Kurose couldn't talk to anyone about it. Kurose, his voice breaking, shouted at them to stop with the nonsense and just tell him why they were doing this to him. He asked if it was somehow his fault, and if so, he was sorry. But Fudo wasn't moved. Instead, he stepped on Kurose's back and said it was fun to bully him, wondering aloud why Kurose even needed to ask, as it should have been obvious by now. Kurose began crying. He wondered why they were doing this to him. If there was no reason behind it, what else could he do? He couldn't ask anyone for help, and even if he fought back, they had strength in numbers. He hadn't dropped out of school like he had planned, and now they had killed another innocent bunny. He feared that if things kept going this way, he might be next. Later, Kurose stood silently in front of the grave of the bunny. Teacher Shiratori approached and told him that he had heard from Miss Ne that the bunny was rejected by the others. They responded that bunnies were usually docile and couldn't understand why things would suddenly change. He thanked the teacher for his concern and turned to leave, but Shiratori gently grabbed Kurose's hand to stop him. He said that maybe the bunny didn't die simply because it was rejected. Kurose replied that even if that wasn't the reason, what could they possibly do now? Shiratori admitted that it was hard to believe, and if what Kurose said was true, then seeking revenge wouldn't bring the lost bunny back. Kurose then asked what he should do. Putting a comforting hand on Kurose's shoulder, Shiratori told him that he still hadn't truly relied on him yet. Even if there were things Kurose couldn't do himself, that was all right. Shiratori would find out who was responsible and deal with them. He asked Kurose not to let hatred stain his hands, and reminded him that he once said he wanted to become a teacher. A girl in class asked Kurose what was going on, and said that if he ever wanted to talk, he could. Teacher Shiratori added that students could even write anonymously, because sometimes strange or troubling things might be happening outside of class as well. Kurose thought to himself that Shiratori shouldn't have said that. He was certain it would backfire. Sure enough, he noticed Fudo glaring at him from across the room, his eyes cold and sharp. Later that day, during the rain, Fudo and his group cornered Kurose and dragged him to the school's terrace. There, they kicked him until he fell. Fudo leaned in and asked if Kurose had told the teacher anything. Kurose insisted he hadn't, but Fudo wasn't convinced. He pressed further, asking what Shiratori had said earlier in class, clearly believing Kurose must have said something to prompt it. Another boy struck Kurose, demanding to know what he had done, and warning him that if people found out they were bullies, everything would come crashing down. Fudo then coldly stated that all the problems would go away if Kurose simply died. He pulled out a phone camera and declared he would make it look like a suicide. He would leave a fake suicide note on Kurosa's phone. Fudo began typing a message saying that the bunny had died because of Kurosa, and that to atone for it, Kurosa had gone to join his friend. Kurosa, overwhelmed and shaking, said he couldn't die because he had a dream of becoming a teacher. He pleaded for them to stop. But a girl from the group stepped forward and coldly confronted him. She asked why he was pretending to be the victim when he was the cause of his own bullying. She told him to take responsibility and die. The others backed her up. She added that she had dreams too, and implied that Kurosi's existence was getting in the way of those dreams. A boy approached Kuriko and cautioned her not to be too direct. They, standing nearby, was stunned by what he was witnessing. Kuriko then suddenly turned to Kurose and begged him to do everyone a favor by ending his own life. She said that her friends from the basketball club needed her and that she didn't want her future ruined because of him. Kurose was completely shocked by the cruelty of her words and the ongoing bullying. Another boy stepped behind Kurose and whispered coldly, asking if there was anyone who would even mourn for him. He added that everyone knew the truth. Kurosa's own parents hated him. Then a third boy chimed in saying that if that was truly the case, then perhaps dying would actually be a blessing for someone like Kurose. Kurose, shaken to his core, wondered how they could say such things. When did dying become a blessing? Sensui, another one from the group, told Kurose to consider that maybe the people closest to him were all suffering because of him. If that were true, then maybe, by dying, he could finally do something good. He could make it up to his mother. Kurosa's voice trembled as he told them that wasn't what he wanted at all. By this point, Kurose had been pushed dangerously close to the edge of the rooftop, a place slick and slicker by the minute due to the rain. As the others surrounded him, their words didn't stop. They kept chanting, urging him to just die, for everyone's sake. Tears streaming down his face, Kurosa's legs gave out. His foot slipped on the wet surface, and he lost his balance. In that moment, as he fell, he cried out that he would never forgive them. Fudo extended a hand as if trying to help, but it was too late. Whether the gesture was real or performative didn't matter. Kurose had already fallen. Fudo, watching him disappear below the rooftop, muttered to himself, questioning whether Kurose really cared about forgiveness at all. Even so, whether bullying or suicide was right or wrong, Kurose could no longer process it clearly. His heart was numb. In his final thoughts, he noticed that teacher Shiratori had seen his shoes, which had fallen from the rooftop before he did. As Kurose fell, he landed headfirst, right onto teacher Shiratori. In that fleeting moment, Kurose found himself wishing he could pursue his dream just once more. He knew that hell might be waiting for him, but still, couldn't he try again, just one more time? The scene shifts after a few days, and students were talking that no police had shown up at the school. It appeared as though no foul play had been found. Students whispered in the halls, speculating about whether it had really been a suicide attempt. Some claimed that the police had found a note, but to everyone's surprise, Kurose had survived the fall. He was still alive, though currently unconscious. The worst part, many said, was that teacher Shiratori had been hit as well during the incident. As Fudo passed a group of girls near the art room, they looked at him with admiration. Fudo remarked that he wished their teacher could have seen the painting he had done. One of the girls commented that the portrait was truly stunning. Another agreed, saying it was so good that it could win any competition. He mentioned that it had been Yui who did it, and it almost felt like they were complimenting him. They said he truly was a natural model, but he responded that they were merely flattering him. Just then, teacher Shiratori arrived, commenting that it seemed a lot had happened while he was away. The students were so happy to see him that they asked if he was all right. He told them not to underestimate him. The students became emotional, crowding around him and saying they were truly glad to have him back. He apologized for making them worry. One of the girls remarked that it was strange because Shiratori had been referring to himself using boku, a Japanese masculine pronoun. He replied that it might be because he had hit his head. A delinquent girl who was with Fuko said it would have been better if Shiratori had died too. Fuko agreed, and since Shiratori had discovered the oddity involving Kurose, she suggested that if he became more of a problem, they should get him dismissed. The girl pointed out that it might be possible, given the influence of Fuko's father. However, Fuku snapped that it was none of her business, and unless she wanted her secret revealed, she should stay quiet. The girl grew scared, and just then, Shiratori approached Fuku and asked what was going on. Fuku responded that it was nothing, adding that they were simply glad he was okay. Shiratori said that if Fuku truly meant it, then it was worth returning as a teacher. He placed a hand on Fuku's shoulder. Fuku turned toward him, and when Shiratori said something humorous, Fuku smiled slightly and replied with a maybe. Then Shiratori bowed his head slightly, asking for forgiveness and saying it really was nothing. Shiratori affirmed that it truly was nothing. He reminded them that after the collision with Kurose had awakened to the role of a teacher, the teacher's soul had entered Kurose's body, and Kurose's soul had entered his. It was his chance, through popularity and trust, to confront all the wrongdoers and take his revenge. It was just as some had said, Kurose didn't need to forgive anyone, and that's why he had won. He then picked up a tool and stabbed it into the eyes of a portrait of Fuku, speaking of inhumanity, cruelty, sadism, and bullying. Until they learned their lesson, he declared, he would make sure to confront them and review it all with them. In the past, Kurose had been a frequent target of bullying. His tormentors once hit him with a baseball, leaving him injured and helpless on the ground. As they walked away, they told him they would meet him again the next day and advised him mockingly to train himself for his own good. Kurose was in so much pain he couldn't even stand up. With tears in his eyes, he silently wished they would just leave him alone. Then, a boy approached him and remarked that things weren't looking good for Kurose, at least until he got robbed. Kurose was confused and wondered why the boy had come to him. The boy explained that while the others might not have noticed, he had seen that Kurose had recently taken up a new part-time job. He then revealed that he had taken money from Kurose's wallet. Kurose demanded that he return the money, but the boy ignored him. Instead, he said he needed the money to buy high-quality art supplies so he could paint a portrait of Fudohu for an upcoming art competition. According to him, only the finest materials would be worthy of capturing Fudohu's elegance. Kurose suggested that he use his own money, but the boy scoffed at the idea, saying he wouldn't risk injuring his hands by working. He then kicked Kurose and threatened him, asking whether he wanted the others to find out what kind of work he was doing. The boy suggested a price, 10,000 yen per painting, or perhaps 50,000 if Kurose wanted to keep things quiet in 2 different ways. But then, with mock generosity, he offered to settle for 30,000, calling it a great bargain. Kurose protested, saying that the money he had saved was meant for the school field trip. The boy cruelly responded that Kurose didn't have any friends anyway, so there was no point in going. Kurose quietly shared that his dream was to become a teacher one day, and he wanted to experience what it would be like in advance. The boy sneered at the idea, saying no one would ever want to be taught by someone like Kurose. He added that if Kurose ever did become a teacher, the only students he would attract would be weaklings and losers. Kurose had tried to take his money back, asking the boy why he was saying such cruel things, especially when he himself once dreamed of becoming an artist. But the boy scoffed and told him not to lump them together. His own dream, he said, at least had the potential to make a positive impact. In contrast, Kurose's dream was nothing but toxic, and his worth to society was 0. Then, without warning, the boy grabbed a baseball and struck Kurose in the head. Suddenly, Rosa jolted awake. It had only been a dream, but one rooted in memory. He was now in the body of his teacher, Shiratori, and realized that 8 days had passed since their minds had mysteriously switched. Somehow, he had been managing the daily responsibilities of a teacher, navigating the routines and expectations. But there was something else burning inside him now: revenge. The 5 students who had tormented him, the ones who had stripped away his dignity, had no idea that his search for justice had already begun. As he bathed, he looked at himself and wondered if he was attractive enough to ruin his teacher's life completely by using this new form, perhaps even to the extent of beating his abusers to death and ending up in prison. But then he reminded himself, bullying wasn't just about the physical pain of being beaten. It went deeper. Much deeper. If Kurose was truly going to carry out his revenge, he knew it had to be done in a way that would leave a lasting scar, one that would truly hurt them, not just physically. That was his intention with each of the 5 who had tormented him, and he planned to begin with the so-called artist of the group, Manabu. The chaos began when the students discovered that a painting had been vandalized. Everyone was shocked. One of the girls from the group of 5 remarked that the painting had been incredible. asking if it wasn't the same one Yui had painted for Fudu. Fudu confirmed it, adding that the piece had even won the competition. Another boy speculated aloud whether the destruction had been fueled by jealousy. Meanwhile, in Class 2B, students were sprawled across their desks, resting after an exhausting PE session. It was finally lunchtime. The 5 students were sitting together, and they asked Yui if he was doing okay after what had happened. Yui gave a strained smile and replied that he felt like complete garbage. He said he was on the verge of falling into depression and asked if they had any idea how long it had taken him to complete that painting. Just then, teacher Shiratori entered the classroom, asking the students to give him a moment of their time. Surprisingly, Miss Nene arrived as well. Shiratori addressed the class, announcing that during gym class, a serious matter had come up. A girl's underwear had gone missing. The students were stunned by what they had just heard. One of the delinquent boys muttered whether the culprit could be someone from their own class. Another pointed out that they shared PE sessions with another class, so it could have been anyone. Miss Nene quickly urged everyone to settle down, telling them to stay quiet. Tori added that it was still uncertain whether the underwear had actually been stolen or merely misplaced. However, in light of the earlier incident with Yui's destroyed painting, the faculty had grown concerned. He stated that the situation pointed to a breakdown in public morals, and to prevent any further incidents, they had decided to conduct a search of everyone's belongings. One boy protested, asking them to have mercy, but Yui stood up and encouraged everyone to cooperate, saying he really didn't want to deal with any more trouble. Shiratori thanked him for his support, then turned to Nene and asked if she would mind checking the girl's belongings. She agreed. Meanwhile, they, still in Shiratori's body, began checking the boys' bags. A student voiced concern, saying Shiratori was taking too long with each search and that Nene was already about to finish her side. Sei apologized, but politely asked her to check the boys' bags as well. Nene nodded and began her part of the search, starting with Yui's bag. Yui silently wished she had chosen someone who looked more suspicious, but resigned himself and handed over his bag. As she checked, Nene suddenly paused, visibly surprised by what she had found. Yui asked what it was, and to everyone's shock, she revealed a bra and a pair of underwear stuffed inside the bag. Gasps filled the classroom. She stared at Yui and asked if he had been the one who had taken them. Yui was utterly stunned and denied it immediately, insisting it wasn't his doing. Shiratori quickly asked the class to remain calm and silent. He took a moment, then placed a reassuring hand on Yui's shoulder and said that they would talk about it more after school. Yui was left completely speechless, frozen in shock at the accusation and the sudden turn of events. Shiratori silently thought to himself that things were going well. It seemed no one had noticed him sneaking into the school during gym class, and there was no indication that he had been found out. Later, after school, Shiratori sat with Nene and Yui to address the incident. Yui immediately insisted that he wasn't the one who had stolen the underwear. Turning to Nene, he asked her to explain exactly what had been found in his bag. He repeated that he had nothing to do with it and had no idea how those items ended up there. He also reminded them that he had been attending the PE class at the time the theft supposedly occurred, making it impossible for him to be responsible. Nene, however, pointed out that it had been an off-campus run during gym, implying that the opportunity for someone to sneak away was still possible. Yui argued that if that were the case, then anyone could have done it. Sensing Yui's discomfort and the tension in the room, Shiratori suggested that perhaps Yui was too embarrassed to speak openly in front of a female teacher. He asked Nene if she would mind leaving him alone with Yui so they could talk more comfortably. Nene agreed and handed over full responsibility for the situation to Shiratori before stepping out. Once they were alone, Yui turned to Shiratori and earnestly pleaded his innocence, begging him to believe him. Shiratori reassured him, saying he wasn't doubting Yui at all. He understood there was no way Yui would do something like that. However, he also explained that convincing him wasn't enough. They had to convince Nene too. If not, Yui could face suspension from school. Yui was visibly shaken and asked Shiratori not to scare him like that. He couldn't believe suspension was even on the table for something he didn't do. Shiratori then added that he was worried not just about the suspension, but about how this situation might affect Yui's future, especially his dream of becoming an artist. Shocked by Shiratori's words, Yui asked him to stop joking around, but Shiratori's tone remained serious. He explained that in the modern world, everything was available online, and with today's cancel culture, one misstep was enough to destroy a person's life. The more Yui tried to pursue his dream, Shiratori warned, the more severe the consequences of a scandal would become. No one, he said, not friends, not family, would want to associate with someone labeled an underwear thief. Shiratori painted a bleak picture. Yui would struggle to find work, be isolated socially, and might live out a miserable life in obscurity. He coldly told Yui to forget about his dream of becoming an artist, because from that point on, practicality would be all that remained of his life. At that moment, Yui suddenly stood up and defiantly declared that he would become an artist. Shiratori responded by asking if Yui even understood how difficult it was to prove that someone didn't do something. That's why it was called the devil's proof. Yui began to panic, clearly overwhelmed by the consequences he might face. Then Shiratori reached out, took hold of Yui's head gently, and told him not to worry, that they would figure it out together. He said he would protect Yui even at the cost of his own life. Tears welled up in Shiratori's eyes, and Yui, taken aback by the sudden emotional display, asked what he should do. He pleaded with Shiratori to teach him what steps to take. Inwardly, Shiratori smiled. This was the twist he had hoped for. He believed he had now gained Yui's full trust. He stood up and, pretending to wipe away his tears, told Yui that realistically, the only way to prove his innocence was to find the real culprit. Yui sighed, saying how unfair and difficult it all felt, how they had ended up in such an impossible situation. Shiratori agreed, then carefully added that perhaps the real culprit didn't even have to be the real culprit. Maybe Yui had been framed. He placed a hand on Yui's shoulder, causing the boy to flinch slightly, and with a chilling calmness told him that this, the uncertainty, was the real problem. Then he smiled and said it was just a joke, reassuring Yui once again that he didn't believe he would do something like that. Still, Shiratori wondered what move to make next. He knew that now that Yui had been pushed into action, all that remained was the final step. With everything lined up, Shiratori decided it was time, and he reached out to ask Miss Nene for a small favor. The PE class came once again. A fat boy didn't look well, and another boy remarked that Fuji was worried about his weight. Yui noticed that everyone had already left, and then he took out a girl's underwear and secretly placed it in Fuji's bag. He said it was to help Fuji become a stepping stone for the sake of his dream. In the teacher's staff room, a bald teacher approached Shiratori and asked if he had seen Nene. Shiratori replied that he had asked her to get some items for him. The teacher commented that it was lovely and mentioned that Nene seemed to admire Shiratori greatly. Shiratori responded that it wasn't like that. Meanwhile, Kurose thought about what might happen if the two of them were to run into each other. Nene entered Class 2B and found Yui doing something suspicious. She asked him what he was doing. Yui was shocked to see her and realized he had been caught red-handed. Kurose thought to himself that the show Yui had created had now begun, and he drew a circle around Yui's photo. In the conference room, Yui was sitting with Nene and Shiratori, insisting that he was innocent and only wanted to prove it. Nene questioned what he was even talking about and asked whether he hadn't just tried to frame someone else for his own wrongdoing. She then addressed Shiratori, saying that they had already informed the higher-ups about the situation. Shiratori interrupted, defending Yui by saying that he wasn't the type of person to do such a thing, and that he had always pursued his dream with genuine passion. Nene asked Shiratori if he still intended to defend Yui, reminding him that just the day before, someone had discovered a girl's underwear in Yui's bag. On that very same day, he had been caught trying to sneak it into someone else's bag. She insisted there was no way they could justify or defend his actions any longer. Shiratori admitted that she wasn't wrong. Yui, visibly shaken, pleaded with him to wait. He was stunned by Kurose's actions. Shiratori stood up from his seat, thinking to himself that he hoped no one misunderstood him. He wasn't trying to pass judgment on Yui or declare him guilty. Still, he couldn't deny that what had been done in the past couldn't simply be overlooked. In the end, the ultimate goal of the revenge was to completely destroy Yui's dreams. And now, it only needed one final push to bring everything crashing down. Kurose then spoke up, saying that she had done something truly foolish. He added that he had genuinely supported Chi's dream of becoming an artist. To prove it, he revealed a sketch he had drawn. Hai was stunned when he saw it. He couldn't believe that even someone with Kurose's seemingly unimpressive form had managed to create such a work. He thought to himself that cruelty shouldn't have been able to afford something of such high quality. Tori then commented that, given the current circumstances, he doubted whether the gift held any real meaning anymore. When Yui heard that, he immediately knelt down, sincerely regretting his actions. Although he tried to shift the blame, the underwear in question was indeed something he had brought. He insisted that no one had been harmed and pleaded for forgiveness. Nini asked what was going on, but Shiratori told her to wait. He said that if what Yui had claimed was true, then it was a matter of proving his innocence to resolve everything. She gave it some thought, and Shiratori mentioned that he only needed 12 hours. She agreed and left, telling him he had until the end of the day. Whether or not she would report the matter to the higher-ups, she said, would depend entirely on him. As she headed out, she added that, including the incident involving cruelty, Class B had been facing far too many issues lately. Yui stated that she didn't need to compare him with Kuros, as Kuros had been suicidal, whereas his own situation was merely a case of false accusation. He insisted that he hadn't intended to cause trouble, and asked Shiratori if he didn't agree with him. Shiratori suddenly got up and punched Yui, making him fall back. He asked angrily why Yui still hadn't reflected on his actions and said that if Yui hadn't tried to frame someone else, none of it would have happened. Yui was shocked by what he witnessed. Shiratori then forced Yui to his feet and told him that he had realized he had squandered his own dreams through his own actions, and now it was time to face the consequences. Yui looked at him, and Shiratori told him that he would be checking the security cameras. Yui simply returned to class, but he couldn't help wondering about the cameras. Shiratori confirmed it, saying that he had been reviewing the footage from each camera since the previous night. Shiratori mentioned that it was during his review that he discovered some suspicious figures lurking in the shadows, and he believed they might be the real culprits behind the incident. Yui asked if he was being serious. Shiratori then stated that they didn't have solid proof yet, and that he was still reviewing the remaining footage. He told Yui to wait for him after school. Yui agreed. About 4 hours later, an old man entered the classroom, quoting the saying, "Slow and steady wins the race." Yui's legs began trembling and sweat formed on his forehead. He anxiously wished for the school day to end so he could finally hear the results. After school ended, Yui approached teacher Shiratori, who appeared downcast. Shiratori stood up and bowed deeply, offering a sincere apology. Yui, confused, asked what he was even apologizing for. Shiratori replied that all the security camera footage had been lost, explaining that the computer was an old one. Yui was shocked and rushed over to Shiratori, demanding to know what he meant by that and whether he hadn't made any backup copies. Shiratori apologized again, saying that he had also misplaced the USB drive somewhere. Yui, shocked and desperate, said that he would do anything. Shiratori just had to find a way to do something.